Jack here, owner of Hockey Alley, bringing you back hockey history. Stories forgotten, stories you haven't heard about, or stories that you remember. Today's guest is NHL player Morris Lukowich. This is part 4. How are you doing, Morris?
I'm doing excellent today. Thank you, Jack. Thanks for asking.
Oh, you're welcome. And we did part 3. This is part 4. I was very impressed with the collection you had that you over the years, hockey memories. In the last video, it was awesome.
Well, thanks. You know what? I'm very, very blessed that we have so many fantastic memories of having been able to play with Gordie Howe, Bobby Hull, sit beside Ray Bourque, play on the same team as Tiger Williams, Marcel Dion, Dave Taylor in L.A. There was lots of cool stories there. And, I was just very, very lucky for a young boy who grew up in nowhere, Saskatchewan, where we didn't even have an indoor hockey rink. So,
wow. Yeah, awesome.
Very lucky.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And you also played with Dale Hawerchuk in Winnipeg?
Yes. Hawerchuk was such an incredible hockey player. He ended up winning Rookie of the Year, and we played lots together on a line that year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just really impressed with his puck handling skills and the way he could, because he wasn't the fastest skater, but he was so good with the puck that he could quite often mesmerize the defenseman with the puck and get around him.
So he had good shifty, you would say?
Shifty, and but for an example, the very first time I saw this move in Winnipeg, I just kind of it was my jaw dropped. It was, and eyes popped open. It was like, wow. And what it was, he came down his off wing, and when he got right to the blue line, there's a defenseman who's right there, basically right in front of him, and thinking to himself, take the man, and he's not going to let Hawerchuk do anything. And then all of a sudden, Howie, and his nickname was Ducky, he just all of a sudden went and put the puck on his backhand and flipped it up in the air from his right to his left. And it was interesting how all of a sudden the defenseman's eyes went to the puck because it was right up in front of his face. And in this situation, the defenseman actually took a couple of swats at it with his stick and missed it. And the thing is, as soon as Dale flipped it up in the air, he cut straight left. And so he ended up, while the defenseman was waving at it with his stick trying to knock it down, Dale was then had the edge then. Then when the puck landed, it was outside of the defenseman's reach, and now Dale had the puck and he was by him.
Wow.
And they went, wow, that was cool.
That's cool. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it was, he totally mesmerized the defenseman by actually putting the puck in the air right in front of the defenseman and got the defenseman distracted and got the defenseman thinking about the puck instead about him. And I saw him do it many times. And it was and it had to be a little careful too, because when a player cut to the middle in our era of hockey, it was dangerous. He had the ability to actually go about almost all the way around and then flip the puck off the net, spin back to his forehand, and he'd pass it to his forehand, and he'd leave the defenseman there, and then he would walk out on the forehand. The first time I ever saw that done was by Gretzky, where he actually passed it to himself off the net, but Hawerchuk was an expert at it. He could trick guys with that so often.
That's a cool move. Just even with the wood sticks, he was able to pull off those moves. That's amazing.
Yeah,
the composite, it's easier.
And he had a very good wrist shot and a very, very, very good slap shot.
And he had 500 plus goals, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a real natural goal scorer. He was okay with hanging around the front of the net, and he was a little bit like a Gretzky, not quite as good, and yet he did many of the things that Gretzky did. just the way he would disappear in behind the net and then pop out on the other side, and the puck would come to him, and he'd dump it into a wide open net.
Yeah.
And he was really just a lot of fun to play with. He had a fantastic attitude.
That's good.
He was young. And every once in a while, he would get pissed off at the other team, and he'd be screaming at somebody. It'd be funny to see him get mad. And I was very, very saddened when he passed away.
Yeah.
But here's a Dale Howard story. Was that so he had that. He was Rookie of the Year, and then I think it may have been next year or the year after, and so he had another successful year, and it ended up that the start of this one season, we had a new coach, and the coach was Tom Watt, and it ended up that Tom was a real believer in four lines. And so it ended up that Dale didn't have a very good start to the season. And just wait, so it ended up that it was maybe the second year after Tom Watt was with us, because I believe Tom Watt was Coach of the Year with us. I'd have to check on this. But so Dale was Rookie of the Year, and then Tom ended up being Coach of the Year. But it ended up we started this one season, and Tom had decided he was going to go with four lines. And it ended up that Dale did not have a very good start to the season. And so it ended up that, without me knowing it, a reporter by the name of Ren Blair came to me, and he said, "Morris, what do I think about four lines? Do I like four lines?" And I said, "Ren, the only guys that like four lines are the fourth line." Yeah, I said otherwise. And if we actually look at Dale's third year, he ended up with 37 goals that year, 102 points. But his goal scoring was down, and it was because he had a bad start to the season that year. And so I guess without me realizing, Ren had gone to him first, asking him what was going on, how come he wasn't having a good year, and Dale basically said to him, "Well, I'm not on the ice right now at all.
Not playing much."
He said, "Yeah," he said, "we're playing four lines, and I'm not getting any ice time." And so it ended up in the newspaper. So I didn't realize he had said that to Ren, but I made that comment to Ren. The only guys that like four lines were the fourth line, and I said I really believe that the fourth line was basically two penalty killers. That we get a penalty, throw those two guys out, and also have a guy on there that could really, really scrap. That if we were down in the game, we wanted somebody to get out there and fight, throw our fourth line out there and start a fight with somebody, because that's sometimes can change the energy of a team.
Yeah.
Well, it ended up the next day I came into the dressing room, and here was Tom Watt's Coach of the Year plaque hanging in Dale's locker, where we changed clothes. And so we had one room where we hung up all our street clothes, and then we went into and our underwear was there, so we'd get into our hockey underwear, and then we'd go in the next room and get into the dressing room. So when I saw this hanging in his stall, I was wondering, wow, what's going on? And Dale wasn't in there yet, so I went over the newspaper and opened up the newspaper, and I got read about Dale's comments about how much he disliked four lines, and then my comment about that the only guys that liked four lines were the fourth line. So I was a little surprised that the Tom's Coach of the Year wasn't hanging in my stall, but he only had one of them. I guess if he had two, he would have put one in each of it. But so Dale came into the room, and I was sitting there, and he looks, and he went, "Oh, why, WTF, my gosh." And so I said, "Well, take a peek at the paper." So he went over and he read the article, and so it ended up that there was a little bit of a rift between him and Tommy for a bit. But what happened immediately, though, was all of a sudden Dale went from not only playing his line, his shift, but he would also play then the third shift.
Okay.
So we had using 4 lines, but it ended up our third line got bumped down one. So it ended up Dale would play with the first line, and then he'd play with the fourth line. And so we'd go first, second, fourth, third, back to first. So Dale was playing then every 2 shifts. And wow, he just got hot.
Yeah.
And it back like he ended up with 102 points that year and had a heck of a season.
Yeah.
But that was it. And then really that was the only time I ever heard him kind of complain about ice time, because I think he always got incredible ice time after that.
Yeah, makes a difference for sure. Ice time is huge. If you don't play enough, you can't produce.
And he had 100-point seasons 6 out of 7 years.
That's
6
amazing.
out of his first.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did you play in any crazy ice rinks? We were talking about this the other day. You were mentioning that you played in some crazy ice rinks over the years, arenas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, many of the original arenas had little city or idiosyncrasies to them. Like, so one was I only ever played one game in the Detroit Olympiad, and it's where Gordie Howe played for years and years and years, and Alex Delvecchio, Frank Mahowich, I mean, all the great Detroit players. And but so the one time we played there were 2 things that were different than any other rink. One was on the ice, the boards, they were about 4-foot high boards. And the thing was, the ledge along the top, it wasn't a square edge. So what happened, it was actually on an angle. Mm-hmm. And so a puck could not land on that ledge and stay there. If it ended up on that ledge, it would slide back onto the ice. And so it was really kind of different. And I'm not sure why they had it and nobody else had it. But the thing was, it was very good because it was way easier on the hips. Like if you got taken in the boards, you never got this sharp corner into the hips.
Yes.
And so I really liked it. And so that was the only rink, though, I ever saw in any NHL arena that had that. It was Detroit. And then on the bench, there was something that was absolutely, I could not believe it, was that on the bench, the only thing that was between us and the fans was a wire. Like one wire. And it was behind the bench. It was maybe about 2 feet off the bench. And there were some poles, but the poles were just thin poles. And like, literally there was this wire. So during a game, like I could basically turn around and shake hands with whoever was behind me. Or have a conversation with whoever was behind me. And I could not believe that there was, such a lack of some sort of concrete or plexiglass or something to separate us and the crowd. It was the only place I ever sat that close to the crowd. Like in Maple Leaf Gardens and Montreal Canadiens, the crowd was like right behind us too, except there was a little hallway. So there was the bench, the coach was standing behind the bench, then there was a cement causeway, and then the seats would start right behind that. And they'd be seated above us somewhat. But my gosh, like here, it was just like right there. And it was always something that if anybody's ever got to spend any time with Gordie Howe, Gordie spoke very, very quietly. Like I could never figure out why this was. Like many times Gordie would be telling a story and I would have to lean in to hear what he was saying. And many times I never did hear what he said, but I just nodded and laughed when it seemed like it was the appropriate time to laugh. But he talked so quietly. And I'm convinced that the reason that he did was because Detroit had the same thing on their bench. And I think that he talked quietly to his teammates, probably, if some fan was hassling him or hassling somebody else. And so he would say it quiet enough that the fans wouldn't hear.
Was this for both benches? Was this only for the home team that was a wire, or was it for both benches?
No, it was for both benches.
So the opposing fans never tried to do anything that when you played there?
No, but they could have. Like, I mean, it would have been easy for somebody to be, got knifed or shot. Wow. And it would have been, and the crowd was, but it was, I thought, very, very lousy seats for them in a way, because whoever was in that row behind us, because we were constantly standing up. And I know I even felt guilty sometimes that I was standing up, because I knew I was blocking their view. So that was one game where I did my best just to stay seated, in order to make it easier for them to watch the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one thing in an original six. Another was in Boston. In Boston, there were a few rinks that were smaller than other rinks. Mm-hmm. And like Chicago had a very small neutral zone. And but with Boston, the boards, like in most rinks, when we get to the hash marks into the offensive zone, the hash marks that are on the boards, the corners go deep. So like a player can skate deep into the corner and then start to cut towards the net.
Yeah.
In Boston, the boards basically went right from the hash marks to the net. There wasn't really a corner. Oh. It was like different than any other rink in the NHL. So there's one of the very first times that we played in there, I came zooming down on Ray Bork on my off wing, and I made a little fake to the middle, and then I just cut her to the outside, and I started going as fast as I could. And I thought to myself, wow, like I've got him beat. And right when I went to cut in, I absolutely creamed, like crashed on the boards. And it ended up, I basically ran into the end boards. My stick went flying. My gloves went flying. And it ended up I went flying. And it ended up Ray Bork just went and picked the puck up, and he went skating up the ice. When I got back to the bench, like my teammates were just laughing. And it was like, because like I did not realize that I was going to run out of room that fast.
Is that why there was a lot of hitting in Boston, more than other teams, from what I heard?
Well, yeah, but one reason was because it was so small. Uh-huh. Like, it might have been one of the advantages for Phil Esposito, Ken Hodge, and Wayne Cashman, was because when they went in the corners to get the puck, it wasn't very far for them to get the puck from the corner to the front of the net where Phil was. So there was less time for the defense to actually do something. So that meant, like, Phil scored 76 goals as a Boston Bruin. And one of the reasons was he had two wingers that were incredible at getting the puck out of the corner and getting to him in front of the net. And then he had just a real expertise with scoring. But that might have been one of the benefits of really, like, there was no deepness to these corners.
It's crazy. I've been to Boston Garden when I was a kid, but I didn't pay attention to it. And you played in Boston, so you were used to it by then when you left Winnipeg, correct?
Even then, it took me a little while.
Really?
To get used to I had to make my move earlier and then make my cut earlier.
Yeah. Wayne Gretzky never had luck in Boston. That was a rink where he scored the least amount of points from what I heard. And could be why.
Well, is that right? Well, and he made a lot of times very good moves in the corners to get the puck away from the defenseman. So with those corners being shallower, he may not have had as much time to spin his magic in those corners.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another rink that had a real oddity was the Chicago Blackhawk Arena. First of all, to get to it, we had to drive right through one of the poorest parts of Chicago. Like, there was not a vehicle that didn't have all the tires stolen off it. And there was not a building that didn't have a window or all the windows broken in them. It was I was quite saddened when I would drive through there because there was a real poverty in that area.
Wow.
And then the Chicago Arena had a barbed wire fence around it in order to protect any cars that were in there, and also people. And then the dressing rooms were quite odd. At least, yeah, for both teams, I believe, was that they were in the basement, and so and they had a tile that was more more slippery than the ice itself.
Wow.
Like, we had all sorts of guys that wiped out on the tile, actually just attempting to move around the dressing room. It was, I don't know what it was with this tile, but it was just slick, and it was dangerous. And but anyways, we'd have to go from our dressing room, and then we'd slip and slide our way up this tile ramp in order to get to some stairs, and then there were two stairways that led up to the ice. And so when we get to the top of the stair, we would actually come out right where the fans were. And so literally, when you got to the top step, you could turn. Like, I actually said hello to some fans, asked them how things were going, and they were like right there, right next to the goal jet. Yeah, and so we'd come out and then go on the ice, and then we'd play a very, very tough period of hockey. We'd come down, and we'd have to go down these stairs back to the dressing room, and then this down ramp that had this tile on it, it would slip and slide down that, trying to get back to our seats.
Michel Dion was telling me, he's a goalie. He said that it was tough on the goalies with the pads to go up and down those stairs.
Oh, very tough.
Yeah.
Very, very tough.
That's crazy. Wow. Well, and that was the all original 6 teams that you were mentioning, the arenas. So far.
Yeah. So then the Madison Square Garden had something strange about it also. So it was, and by the way, like, sometimes it was actually difficult to figure out how the heck to even get into these rinks. Like, I know the very first time I was attempting to get in Madison Square Garden, like, somehow we had a hotel that was near, and we were just told to walk over to the rink. And so I walked over, and man, like, how the heck do I get into this place? And then where's the dressing room? And so it ended up, I finally find an elevator. I get into this elevator, and I asked the guy if he knows where the visitors' dressing rooms are, and he says, "Oh yeah, they're up on the 5th floor or something like that." And actually, a very strange thing happened that time. If you remember in a previous story, I had my agent that he disappeared when we went to negotiate my first contract. That my brother Ed and I actually negotiated my contract between Pittsburgh and Houston.
Yes. And
where I decided to play with Gordie Howe in Houston. But anyways, I'm going up that elevator. There's another guy in the elevator, and he looks over to me. He says, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I went, "No, who are you?" He says, "Well, I was your agent."
Oh.
And then I went, "Oh." And then I recognized him, and I said, "Oh, shit, how you doing?" And I mentioned his name, and he said, "I'm doing okay." He says, "How you doing?" "No, I'm doing okay." And he says, "Well," and he just said, "Congratulations on all the success in hockey." And I said, "Wow, thank you very much." And congratulations to you with all the players that you have, that you're an agent for. And I said, "I know Donnie Murdoch and Greg Carroll both loved you." And so we had this little talk. We hadn't seen each other for years. We had a bit of a talk. The elevator opened, and I shook hands with him and said thanks and bye. Yeah. And so it's strange how things sometimes have an ending to them. And that's where it was the last time I ever saw him.
Wow.
And and I didn't apologize for letting him go as an agent, because in a way he wasn't around when I could have used him. Although, like I said, it was good that he wasn't around then.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, in Madison Square, there were a couple of rinks that were really, really bad, because where the glass went along, there was actually steel between each piece of glass.
Mm-hmm.
And the glass sat out off the glass by like 2 inches or so.
Oh, wow.
So when a guy would get hit into the glass, sometimes you get hit into one of these steel separators. There was in New York, it had that, and also in Minnesota, it had it. And one time, I got hit by Jack Carlson in Minnesota, and he hit me close to the net, but he sent me flying into the boards. And when I hit the boards, I hit this steel separator right on, and it just split my upper lip wide open.
Man, wow.
So it was a very, very dangerous thing, and it ended up that. And I'll finish that story in a minute. But in New York also, it was strange that as the glass came around from the goalie over towards the hash mark and up towards the blue line, it actually stopped.
Oh.
And then there was an opening, and then the penalty box glass started, and then there was an opening, and then the glass started again for the other end. But so along each side there was an opening, and there were guys in there that were photographers. But there wasn't any glass. So this one time I went whipping around, and Barry Beck got me, and he slams me into these boards and literally throws me over the boards. And my skates, I go flying right over this one reporter, and my skates almost hit him in the head. And he was wearing a helmet. And so I land, though, and I'm on concrete. So here I'm in this one area that's between the boards and the fans, and it's not that much. It's maybe about 10 feet, but it's like wide open concrete.
Yeah.
And so I'm laying there, and he looks over, and he is absolutely scared, this reporter, because I've just missed him.
Yeah.
And it ends up, I look over and I ask him, like, are you okay? And he says, yeah. He says, you just missed me. And I said, well, yeah. And I said, but are you okay? He says, well, yeah. And I said, okay, well, I've got to go. And so I stood up, jumped over the boards, but here I'd had my edges damaged on the concrete.
Yeah.
So then I had to get my skates sharpened right away. But that was it was one time that Bubba Beck, he took and like fired me right over the boards. One other piece about so there was a couple arenas that were bad with the glass that way. I will mention a couple junior arenas.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the worst arenas to play in the Western Hockey League, there were a couple that were very bad. One was in Regina, and it was, I think, called Regina, I don't know, but it was a barn. And the thing is, it was right next to, it was in this building that they did livestock sales, right at the very end of the one end, where the teams would come out. So there were the dressing rooms. They were on this one end, but it was also where livestock were sold. So, like, when we were walking from the dressing room to the ice, like, it just smelled just like cow shit. Like, unbelievable bad. Just horrible. Like I almost would throw up. Guys that played there at the time were Clark Gillies, Dennis Sobchuk, Ed Stanhilsky was the goalie there, Greg Jolly. So Regina had a heck of a team at the time. But anyways, then it was incredibly dangerous because one, they had chicken wire around the ends of the rink. Wow. So guys could get their face piled into this and get the face cut up on it. Like chicken wire was vicious stuff. And then also, I mean, the chicken wire was attached to steel rods, so you could get hammered in these steel rods. But in Regina, what was strange, they had chicken wire, but on the side of the boards, all of a sudden the chicken wire ended, and then there was glass. There was a low glass that went along the side, but along the side then, too, were these great big girders, like probably 10-inch or 12-inch wide girders that had no padding on them. Wow. So, like, you could literally get your head or body driven into these girders. And they were right on top of the board. So, like, where the top of the board stopped, this is where this girder was. And there was probably about 6 that ran down the side. So it was, like, dangerous as could be, these girders. Then what happened was, though, there was some glass that started up right about at the goal line, and it ran down to where the players' boxes started. But the strange thing in Regina was right over the gate where the players came on the ice, there was an opening. There wasn't any glass. So it went glass for a short distance. Then there was the gate without any glass. And then there was glass again. So one time I was zooming around Clark Gillies, who at the time was the biggest player in the league. I think it was like 225 and huge and mean. And he was a Southern Regina boy. I was a Northern Regina, he was Southern Saskatchewan. I was Northern Saskatchewan. So he had more reasons to hate me. But anyways, as I was going around, he hooked me. And he hooked me right in, and literally he picked me up. Now, I was only 141 pounds in my first year of junior, so he could bench press way more than that. Anyways, he picked me up in the air, and so my feet were dangling. Wow. And we were skating, and we were coming towards the sideboards, and all of a sudden I realized, wow, there's this opening over the gate. And sure enough, he fires me through this opening.
Oh, man.
And so I get glass, and this glass just about cuts me in half. I mean, have you ever seen that movie The Omen with where there's the lightning strike that comes down through the priest and it cuts him in half? I mean, that's what this kind of looks like. It's so it ends up that he throws me right through this opening, and luckily I was in real good shape and I was young, and I took the hit and I got back up and kept going. And we actually talked about it years later, where there was him, Brian Trottier, Butch Goring, who else was there from the Islanders? And when I told this story, and I thought Butch and Brian Trottier were going to, they were almost crying. They were laughing so hard. So, that was an oddity about that rink.
Wow.
And then the last oddity was Flin Flon, which was in northern Saskatchewan. And they ended up having a protection that went over the player's bench. So what happens, they built a little sort of a hood that went over the player's bench, but it was made out of wood. Oh. It was just plywood. And so sheets of plywood, and it was maybe about 3 feet wide. And so the stuff couldn't be thrown directly down on the players. But they got in behind. They were in behind this thing and they were pounding on these things with sticks, and it was amazing how loud it was.
Wow!
And that was another rink that had chicken wire at the end. How dangerous that was, and we also had this one. Our dressing room is in this one corner in a little bit of a shack, and it ended up that we had a brawl there, and it ended up. What started was that our trainer was off the ice. His name was Lukowich, and he was a bit of a redneck. And he ended up getting into a fight with somebody in the stands. So here he was fighting this guy. All of a sudden, our captain, I remember, yelled at the bench. He says, "We got to help Lou." And I saw him skate off the ice and skating towards our end. And our captain literally we couldn't get off the ice. Our captain climbed the chicken wire and jumped over the ice and started slugging guys. Wow. And so then somehow we ended up all getting off the ice into the crowd, and there was fights going on with people in the crowd. And we ended up getting back into our dressing room, somehow, and we shut the door, and the fans were trying to bust down the door. They were trying to get in. We locked the door, and it had a latch on it, and I remember we were sitting there, and our goaltender at the time was very nervous and started kind of crying. And he says, "Wow," he says, "we could die in here." And I remember I said, I said, "If anybody comes through that door, all we do is we just start swinging our sticks as hard as we can, and as the bodies pile up, it'll stop anybody else from coming in." And then somebody else, yeah. So I just looked around and I said, "Anybody comes through, we just start swinging, and we just pile up the bodies, and finally they'll stop coming." And then some guy said, "Well, what happens if they burn this shack down?" And I haven't got an answer for that one. But so there we were sitting, they were pounding on the door, we were not sure if they were coming in or not.
Wow.
But I was standing up I was just standing up, ready to just start wailing away on guys if they came through those doors.